Welcome to a story about luxury, a public fall, and a woman everyone had mistaken for weak for far too long. They believed she was defenseless. They believed she was nothing more than the quiet wife of a grand estate, a woman who had once been lucky enough to marry the right man. When Arthur Wolf handed his wife a pen and told her to sign the divorce papers, he was smiling as if victory already belonged to him. He thought he was taking everything from her, the house, the name, the social position, and the future. He thought he had finally defeated her. But Alison Hawthorne did not scream. She did not beg for money. She did not cling to a life that had never truly belonged to her. She simply signed, picked up her bag, and walked out into the cold Manhattan rain. Arthur laughed when the door closed behind her. 5 minutes later, that laugh died in his throat. Because when Alison stepped onto the curb outside the towers of Hudson Yards, she did not call a taxi. A black Cadillac Escalade ESV, silent as a shadow, glided up beside her with its windows completely tinted. And the man waiting inside was not a stranger. He was the one person Arthur Wolf truly feared. This is the story of a woman who did not make a scene. She simply took back what had always been hers. The air inside the conference room of Cooper and Partners smelled of lemon polish, expensive leather, and old ambition. It was a cold, bright, sterile space on the 42nd floor of one of the towers in Hudson Yards. Beyond the panoramic glass, Manhattan hung gray and restless. Rain pressed against the windows, turning streets, cars, and lights into blurred streaks of steel, glass, and wet asphalt. Alison Hawthorne sat on one side of the massive dark wood table. She was 34, but under the white office lights her face looked sharper, paler, and more severe. She wore a simple beige coat over a white blouse, exactly the kind of clothing Arthur had once called dull and too quiet. Her hands rested calmly in her lap. Not one finger trembled. She did not look at the city. She looked at the expensive fountain pen lying on top of the documents in front of her. On the other side of the table sat Arthur Wolf. At 38, he looked like the living advertisement of polished success. His Italian suit fit tightly across his shoulders, a little stretched from the body he maintained with expensive trainers and private gyms. Every 30 seconds, he glanced at his watch, a nervous habit that had appeared after his logistics company, WolfLink, entered the national market 3 years earlier and became a favorite of the business press. "Let's finish this, Alison," Arthur said, too loudly for the quiet room. He leaned back in his chair and spread his arms as though not only the conference room belonged to him, but the law firm, the building, and the very air inside it. "I have a flight to Chicago at 6. Unlike some people, I have an empire to run." Daniel Cooper, Arthur's attorney, adjusted his glasses on the bridge of his nose. He looked at Alison with that mixture of pity and professional condescension that certain lawyers can turn into an art form. "Mrs. Wolf," he said, "as stated in the agreement, you waive your right to any recurring spousal support in exchange for a one-time payment of $5 million and the retention of your personal belongings. You also waive all claims to shares in WolfLink and to the family residence in the Hamptons. Do you understand that this decision is final?" Alison lifted her eyes. Her gaze was dark, calm, and unreadable. For 10 years, she had been the invisible woman. The wife who stayed home while Arthur built his company. The wife who poured tea for investors while he spoke to them about the future of logistics. The wife everyone considered too plain for expensive dinners, corporate forums, and meetings with important people. "I understand," Alison said quietly. Her voice was steady. It did not contain the shaking Daniel Cooper was accustomed to hearing in meetings like this. Arthur snorted and shook his head. "God, Cooper, she understands. She just wants to leave. She knows she can't exist in my world anymore." He leaned forward and his smile turned cold, almost predatory. Isn't that right, Allison? You know, I almost feel sorry for you. $5 million won't last long in New York. But don't worry. Maybe you can go back to whatever you were doing before you met me. What was it again? Tutoring math? You'll find a tiny apartment somewhere far from the city. Get a cat. Allison did not even blink. She picked up the pen. Its weight felt satisfying in her hand. Solid. Final. A memory rose in her mind, nights in their first cramped apartment on the edge of Queens, the hum of old servers she had assembled from discarded parts because they could not afford proper cloud infrastructure. Arthur had slept on a sagging couch while she corrected errors in routing algorithms that would later turn into a company valued in the hundreds of millions. She remembered the day he told her not to come to the office anymore because investors needed to see a strong male leader, not a family hobby club. So she stepped back. She made herself smaller so he could feel larger. "Are we done talking, Arthur?" she asked. He blinked, surprised by the cold clarity of her tone. "Just sign the papers, Allison." She lowered the pen. The nib whispered across the page. Allison Grace Hawthorne. She signed the divorce agreement. She signed the non-disclosure agreement. She signed the waiver of property claims. With every signature, she felt an invisible weight leave her chest, as if one link after another was breaking from an old chain. She capped the pen and pushed the stack of documents toward Daniel Cooper. "Done." "Excellent," the attorney said, gathering the papers quickly, almost as if he feared she might change her mind. "The payment will be transferred to your account within 48 hours. Arthur stood and buttoned his jacket. Then he walked around the table and stopped beside her, invading her personal space one last time. He smelled of expensive cologne, leather, and self-satisfaction. "No hard feelings, sweetheart," he said, lowering his voice to a falsely sympathetic whisper. "You were a good first wife. But we both know I outgrew you." He smirked. "Paige, for example, understands what a man in my position requires. She has vision." Paige Warren, a 24-year-old intern from the marketing department. So ordinary in its vulgarity that it was almost funny. Allison finally looked him directly in the eyes. For 1 second, Arthur faltered. He had expected tears. He had expected anger. He had expected pleading. Instead, he saw emptiness. Calm, frighteningly even indifference. "Goodbye, Arthur," Allison said. "I hope your negotiation in Chicago goes exactly the way you deserve." Arthur laughed and slapped Daniel Cooper on the shoulder. "Oh, it will. It will triple our valuation. Enjoy the suburbs, Allison." He grabbed his briefcase and walked out of the room, already barking sharp orders into his phone. He did not look back. He never looked back. Allison rose slowly, smoothed the front of her coat with her fingers, and picked up her bag. It was old leather, worn at the edges, a bag that had seen better days. "Mrs. Wolfe," Daniel Cooper said, pausing by the door, "shall I call you a taxi? It's pouring outside." Allison walked to the exit and stopped with her hand on the brass handle. "I am Hawthorne again," she corrected softly. "And no, thank you. Someone is already here for me." The elevator ride down from the 42nd floor felt like leaving a pressure chamber. Allison watched the numbers change, 30, 20, 10. With every floor, the image of Allison Wolfe, the useful wife of a successful entrepreneur, broke apart a little more. When the elevator doors opened into the marble lobby, the first person she saw was Paige. The young woman sat on a velvet sofa near the entrance, looking at her phone. She was undeniably beautiful, long legs, perfectly styled blonde curls, and a dress more expensive than the payment Allison had just been promised. When Paige saw her, there was no discomfort on her face. No shame. Only a small smile. Paige stood and quickly checked her reflection in the glass wall. "Oh. Hi," she said in a bright, airy voice. "Arthur said you were almost finished. He'll be down soon." Allison stopped. She looked at the young woman who, for the last 6 months, had occupied the space in her husband's private life. And suddenly Allison felt a strange stab of pity. Paige did not understand that she was not the winner. She was merely the next acquisition. A decorative object to be displayed until the shine wore off. "He's on his way," Allison said calmly. "He's in a very good mood. He thinks he won." Paige frowned, not understanding. "He thinks he likes tea without sugar," Allison continued as she walked past her. "But he is always waiting for someone to add 3 spoons. And he hates it when anyone touches his phone." She paused for a moment. "Good luck, Paige." She did not wait for an answer. Allison walked through the heavy revolving doors and stepped into the chaotic symphony of Manhattan's business district. First came the noise, car horns, tires hissing over wet pavement, the dull roar of a city that had never learned to be silent. Rain fell in slanted sheets, cold and relentless. People rushed past under umbrellas, heads down, fighting the wind. Allison did not open an umbrella. She stood beneath the overhang of the skyscraper and inhaled the wet air deeply. It smelled of gasoline, wet stone, and autumn cold. It tasted like freedom. She took a simple button phone from her pocket, an old model separate from the glossy smartphone Arthur had always tried to control. She pressed a single speed dial button. "I'm out," she said. "It's done." He signed away the rights to the old code, asked a deep male voice on the other end. "He didn't even read it," Allison replied, and for the first time in years, an almost invisible smile touched her lips. "He was too busy celebrating the house. He surrendered all rights to intellectual property created before 2019 in exchange for the yacht and the Hamptons residence." A low, dark laugh came through the line. "What an arrogant man. He just traded the engine for a coat of pretty paint. I'll be there in 30 seconds. Allison ended the call and dropped the phone into a trash can. Then she stepped out from under the awning and let the rain strike her face. It washed away the hairspray, the foundation, the mask she had worn for Arthur. Behind her, the revolving doors spun again. Arthur came rushing outside, followed by Paige beneath an enormous umbrella held by the doorman. "Allison!" Arthur shouted when he saw her by the curb. He looked almost comical, trying to shout over the traffic while protecting his Italian loafers from the puddles. "What are you doing? Standing in the rain like you're lost? Have a little dignity." He turned to Paige and pointed at Allison as though she were an embarrassing stranger. "Look at her. This is what happens when a person has no ambition. Sad, isn't it?" Paige gave a nervous little laugh. Arthur reached into his wallet, clearly enjoying his own theatrical generosity. "Need bus money," he called. "Here. Take 5,000. Buy yourself some hot tea." He pulled out a bill and waved it in the air. The doorman looked away. Paige was still smiling, though not as confidently now. Allison did not move. She looked down the street. Through the gray curtain of rain, headlights cut forward. They were not the yellow lights of a taxi or the ordinary glow of a city car. The white beams were sharp, cold, almost diamond bright. The vehicle moved through traffic so smoothly it seemed the city itself was making way. Long black. Heavy. Impeccably imposing. A Cadillac Escalade ESV. The vehicle slid to a stop at the curb beside Allison, throwing up a dirty wave from a puddle that splashed across Arthur's trousers. "Hey," he shouted, jumping back. "Watch where you're driving." The rear door did not simply open. It moved aside with elegant precision, and the driver was already standing beside the car. He had appeared so fast and so quietly that Arthur did not even finish his sentence. The driver was a huge man with the hard line of an old scar along his neck. In his hand he held a large black umbrella that looked less like protection from rain and more like a sign of authority. He opened it over Allison, completely ignoring Arthur. "Miss Hawthorne," the driver said in a low, rough bass. "Mr. Paul Morrison is waiting." Arthur froze. The bill slipped from his fingers and fell straight into a puddle. "Morrison," he whispered. Allison turned to him one last time. Rain streamed from her lashes, but in her eyes burned a fire Arthur had never seen before. "Keep the money, Arthur," she said. "You're going to need it soon." She stepped into the soft leather interior of the vehicle. The driver closed the door, cutting her off from the noise, the rain, and the man who had underestimated her for 10 years. Inside the Cadillac, it was quiet, like a separate world. There was only the soft whisper of climate control and the smooth power of the engine. The air smelled of polished wood, warm leather, and an amber drink in a crystal glass. Across from her sat Paul Morrison. If Arthur Wolfe was the self-declared prince of the technology business, then Paul Morrison was the king of the discreet financial machine that fed it. At 40, he was already a venture investor with a reputation for cold efficiency and an almost frightening ability to anticipate market collapses. He was handsome in a sharp, dangerous way, dark eyes that missed nothing, a touch of gray at his temples, and a suit that cost more than Arthur's car. In one hand, he held a crystal glass filled with amber liquid. He offered the second glass to Allison. "Ginger bourbon, the way you like it," Paul said. Allison took the glass. Her hands remained calm. She took a small sip and felt the warm burn bring her nerves back into order. Then she leaned against the seat under a ceiling where tiny lights resembled an artificial night sky. "You're late," Allison said. "I watched the performance from the corner," Paul replied, and the faintest smile touched his lips. "Especially the part where he offered you bus money. Very cinematic. You could have stepped in." "I almost did. But I know you prefer to handle your past yourself." "He signed away the rights to the code," Allison said, moving immediately to business. Paul's expression changed. The slight mockery vanished, replaced by focused seriousness. He touched the tablet resting on the console between them. "I saw. My legal team just confirmed the registration of the documents. As of 4 o'clock this afternoon, the closed code known as Project Ether, the architectural core of WolfLink, belongs exclusively to Allison Grace Hawthorne." "He thinks it's an outdated component," Allison said, watching rain streak across the tinted glass. "He thinks the product is the interface. He doesn't understand that the self-learning routing algorithm is the brain. He kept the skull and gave away the brain." Paul tilted his head slightly. "And when the partners in Chicago discover that Update 4.0, which Arthur promised them, requires an access key only you possess, the system will lock down," Allison answered simply. "The self-preservation protocol activates in 72 hours. WolfLink will be a beautiful shell without an engine." Paul laughed. It was a real laugh, deep and full. "Remind me never to divorce you, Allison." She looked at him sharply. "Don't." He softened immediately. He reached across the space between the seats, but stopped his hand beside hers without touching it. He respected the borders she had built around herself. "I'm sorry. Too soon." "But seriously, Allison, 10 years. Why did you wait so long? You could have put him in his place in the first year of your marriage." Allison looked into the dark glass. Through it, she could see Arthur on the sidewalk, small, wet, angry, and shouting into his phone. "Because I loved him," she whispered. Or I loved the man he could have become. I thought if I gave him the success he dreamed about, he would finally be happy. He would finally see me. She turned to Paul. I was wrong. You cannot feed a shark and expect it to turn into a dolphin. It only gets bigger. Paul nodded silently. And now? Now, Allison said, her voice turning hard as steel, I take my name back. I take my work back. And I build something that will make Wolf Link look like a child's lemonade stand. Paul pressed the intercom button. To the airfield. Where are we flying? Allison asked, although she already knew. Aspen, Colorado. The International Technology Forum begins in 2 days. This time, you are not going as someone's companion, Allison. You are the keynote speaker. It is time the world met the real architect. As the vehicle entered the highway and accelerated smoothly, Allison watched the lights of Hudson Yards disappear behind them. Somewhere back there, Arthur Wolf was getting into his bright sports car, convinced he was a free man. He did not know the countdown had already begun. Allison took another sip. For the first time in 10 years, silence did not feel lonely. It felt powerful. Paul Morrison? Yes. Did you bring the laptop? He leaned down, pulled a slim laptop in a reinforced aluminum case from under the seat, and handed it to her as though a knight were offering a sword to a queen. Charge. Connected to the satellite channel. Allison opened the lid. The screen glowed blue, reflecting in her eyes. A terminal window blinked, waiting for a command. Enter access key. Allison's fingers hovered over the keys. Then she typed one word. Nemesis. Access granted. Welcome back, architect. She smiled. Let's get to work. The private jet cut through the night sky at 45,000 feet, a silver, silent arrow moving from the east coast toward the Rocky Mountains. Inside the cabin, the light was soft and amber, adjusted to resemble a sunset that never ended. Allison sat in a swivel chair upholstered in cream leather. In front of her lay the same protected laptop. Blue screen light fell over her pale, tired face, but her fingers moved across the keyboard with the precision of a concert pianist. Code lines 450 through 8900. Recompilation in progress. Paul sat across the aisle, reading a report on the logistics market of the Midwest and the Great Plains. He had not said a word in more than an hour, giving her space. That, Allison suddenly realized, was the difference. Arthur filled silence with noise because he feared what silence might reveal about him. Paul allowed silence to breathe. She stopped, holding her hands above the keyboard. The cursor blinked beside a line of code she had written 7 years earlier. Function, optimize _nodes. Memory pulled her away from the luxury of the airplane and into the smell of cold pizza and overheated plastic in a tiny apartment at the edge of Queens. 7 years earlier. Arthur had come home from work at a transport company with his tie loosened and his face red with frustration. He had paced the little room that served as living room, bedroom, and office. They don't understand, Allison, he had said, almost choking on the words. Dispatchers are still using boards. Boards, in the 21st century. If I could show them a system that builds routes by itself based on traffic, weather, and the behavior of the city, I could overturn the whole market. At that moment, Allison was grading math tests at the kitchen table. She looked up and her thoughts had already begun to form a structure. She saw the desperation in his eyes, the fear of being ordinary. Back then, she loved him with fierce, protective naivety. I can build that, she said. Arthur laughed. Not cruelly. More condescendingly. Allison, you tutor school children in algebra. These are complex algorithms. Combinatorial problems. Route optimization. I have a master's degree in computational systems, Arthur. Did you forget? Yes, but you've never really worked in the field. You wanted to be a teacher. She did not argue. That night, after he fell asleep, she opened her old laptop. For 3 straight weeks, she worked almost without rest, sleeping 4 hours a night, studying transport APIs, building a neural network from scratch because the existing libraries were too slow. When she showed Arthur the prototype, the first version of Project Ether, he stared at the screen with his mouth open. It predicts traffic before it appears, he whispered. It analyzes historical data and connects it with weather, local events, and neighborhood behavior, she explained, her eyes shining with pride. It saves 18% in fuel costs. Arthur lifted her off the floor and spun her around. We're going to be rich, Allison. We're going to change everything. We. At 45,000 feet, that word left a bitter taste in her mouth. The shift had happened quietly. First, interviews said Arthur Wolf, founder of WolfLink. Then he stopped mentioning her altogether. I wrote the code in my garage, he told a business magazine one day. When Allison asked him about it, he answered, it's just an image, sweetheart. Investors need someone like Steve Jobs. They don't understand a family team. Trust me. It's for us. Then came the dinners where she was asked to stay in the background. Then came the new chief technology officer, a man who did not understand her code but played excellent golf with Arthur. Then Arthur asked her to stop coming to the office entirely because, according to him, she made the engineers uncomfortable. She allowed it to happen. She made herself smaller to fit inside the box he had built for her. Regret is a useless variable, Paul said quietly, pulling her from the memory. Allison lifted her eyes. He was looking at her over the top of the report folder. I'm not regretting it, she said evenly. I'm debugging the system. You loved him. It was not a question. I love his potential, she corrected. But you can't love a man who sees you as a resource, Paul. I was a battery he drained to power his own ego. Now I'm cutting off the electricity. She pressed enter. The progress bar reached 100%. A green line flashed across the screen. Ether system active. Old protocol in sleep mode. Done, Allison said, closing the laptop. The new architecture is ready for Aspen. And the old one has the clock ticking. All smiled with cold, calculated satisfaction. We land in Aspen in 2 hours. Try to sleep, Allison. When you step onto that stage, the world must not see exhaustion. It must see a woman who has taken justice back. Allison turned her chair toward the window. Below lay the dark emptiness of night America, scattered city lights, and endless black space between them. She did not sleep. She watched the stars, waiting for the dawn of a new world. Chicago shone with a cold neon glow. The boardroom of Great Lakes Heavy Industries occupied the top floor of a high-rise in the financial district, a glass fortress built for power, steel, and money. Arthur Wolf sat at the head of a long table, feeling sweat collect beneath his Italian suit. This was the meeting. The deal that was supposed to triple WolfLink's valuation. Across from him sat Nicholas Reed, respected chief executive of Great Lakes Heavy Industries, surrounded by a team of watchful, skeptical executives. Mr. Wolf, Nicholas Reed said in an even, cold voice, your logistics platform has shown impressive results in the national market. But the Midwest and the industrial routes of the Great Plains are another matter. Distances are longer, conditions are harsher, and margins are thinner. We need absolute precision. You are promising a 20% increase in efficiency with Update 4.0. I'm not just promising it, Nicholas, Arthur said, switching on his usual victorious smile. I guarantee it. He stood, unbuttoned his jacket with careless confidence, and stepped toward the screen. WolfLink is not simply software, he declared. It is intuition. It thinks. He pointed to the enormous screen behind him, where a map of Chicago's transport network and surrounding routes was displayed. Small green dots represented the trucks of Great Lakes Heavy Industries. "Ladies and gentlemen," Arthur said loudly, "welcome to the future." He pressed a button on the remote to launch the 4.0 demonstration. Nothing happened. Arthur pressed again, harder. The screen remained motionless. The green dots did not move. "1 second," he said with a nervous laugh. "Technical details. You know how Wi-Fi can be." He touched the earpiece hidden at his ear. "Ethan. Ethan, wake up. The slide isn't moving." The voice of Ethan Miller, his lead engineer, sounded broken and tense in his ear. "Arthur, it's not the slide. We can't get into the core." Arthur froze. "What do you mean you can't get in?" he whispered, turning away so Nicholas Reed would not see his face. "I don't know. The credentials don't work. The system is demanding a root key. It says the license has expired." "The license has expired?" Arthur whispered, feeling everything inside him go cold. "We own the license." "There's something worse," Ethan said, swallowing hard. "The routing algorithm stopped. Trucks in New York aren't receiving new routes. They're standing still. And the Chicago node just went dark." Arthur lifted his eyes to the screen. The map of Chicago flickered. Then, one by one, the green dots turned red. Then they disappeared. In the center of the enormous screen, a message appeared, clear, cold, and humiliatingly visible to everyone in the room. "Critical error. Primary architecture missing. Error code div_0. Contact administrator A. Hawthorne." The silence in the room became almost physical. Nicholas Reed removed his glasses slowly. "Mr. Wolf," he said, his voice lower now, "where are my trucks?" Arthur fumbled with the administrator app on his phone. "Access denied. Access denied. Access denied. This is external interference," he shouted, panic cracking his voice. "Someone is attacking us. My ex-wife, she's a math tutor, for God's sake. She must have hired someone." "Your ex-wife?" Nicholas Reed asked, lifting one eyebrow. "Allison Hawthorne?" Arthur blinked. "How do you know her name?" Nicholas silently turned his tablet toward him. On the screen, a live broadcast was streaming from the main stage of the International Technology Forum in Aspen. "Because," Nicholas said, "right now she is giving the keynote address. And from the look of it, she is demonstrating a system that actually works." Arthur stared at the tablet without blinking. On the screen was Allison. But she was no longer the quiet woman in a beige coat whom he had left in the rain outside Hudson Yards. She wore a sharp crimson suit that looked like armor. Her hair was pulled back. She looked regal, dangerous, calm. And she was smiling. The auditorium in Aspen was filled to the last seat. 3,000 of the world's most influential people, corporate leaders, investors, politicians, engineers, and innovators, sat in the half-dark, their faces lit by the cool glow of the stage. Allison stood alone at the center of the light. No podium. No papers. No borrowed support. Only her, and a holographic projection floating in the air behind her. "For years," Allison said, her voice amplified cleanly through the hall, deep and confident, "we treated logistics as a brute force problem. We threw more trucks, more fuel, and more people into the chaos of the world. We tried to force the world to obey our schedule." She paused and slowly looked across the audience. Somewhere in the front row sat Paul Morrison. He watched her with such quiet pride that for one instant it almost threw her off rhythm. But Allison held steady. Yet the world is alive, she continued. It breathes. It pulses. You cannot force it. You have to move with it. She raised one hand. The hologram behind her changed. It was no longer a street map. Before the audience appeared something like a nervous system, glowing lines, nodes, and streams of data pulsing like electrical signals through a living body. I present to you Ether, Allison said. This is not an update. It is a new architecture. A new organism. It does not merely predict traffic. It predicts demand before the customer even places the order. A quiet murmur moved through the hall. Ether connects meteorological satellite data, social trends, economic indicators, and regional market behavior in order to rebuild supply chains in real time. The whispering grew louder. People exchanged looks. Some were already typing messages. Others opened laptops. What she was showing was years ahead of anything on the market. Allison lowered her voice again, and the room quieted. But technology is only as strong as the honesty of its code. An abstract diagram of the old architecture appeared on the screen. It named no names directly, but to anyone who followed the market, it was recognizable enough. Yesterday, a major competitor, Wolflink, experienced a serious system failure. A wave of recognition passed through the auditorium. News of the failed Chicago demonstration was already spreading through business channels, private networks, and the financial press. That failure, Allison said, was not a random error. It was the symptom of an outdated foundation. A system was built on a core that, to put it gently, had been constructed from someone else's work. And when the true author took back what belonged to her, the shell could no longer hold. She did not say Arthur's name. She did not need to. The meaning hit more precisely than any accusation. Ether is built differently, Allison continued. It is built on transparency, respect for source, and honest architecture. Starting today, it is available to partners around the world. She gestured toward the screen. A living visualization of a global supply chain appeared before the audience. It was beautiful. Almost like a ballet. Goods, routes, ports, warehouses, vehicles, trains, and data nodes moved in a single harmony. My name is Allison Grace Hawthorne, she said. I am the Chief Executive Officer of Hawthorne Technologies. And I am no longer hiding in the background. First came a few claps. Then the applause grew. Within seconds, the entire hall rose. It was a standing ovation, the kind usually given not to entrepreneurs, but to people who have changed the logic of the game itself. Allison did not smile like a person who had won an argument. She smiled like someone who had survived a long shadow and finally stepped into the light. When she left the stage, the tension did not release immediately. The adrenaline receded slowly, leaving behind a deep exhaustion, an almost physical emptiness in her bones. Backstage, Paul Morrison was waiting with a bottle of water. You were magnificent, he said, handing it to her. Allison took a long drink. Did Arthur see it? Paul glanced at his phone. Oh, yes. He saw it. Wolflink stock dropped 40% in the last hour. The board has called an emergency meeting. Nicholas Reed cancelled the deal. And Arthur is flying to Aspen. Allison went still. He's coming here? He's desperate, Paul said calmly. He thinks he can persuade you. He thinks he can turn on the old charm and you'll come back to fix everything. He doesn't understand that the bridge is already gone. Even the banks have moved too far apart. Allison straightened her jacket. The fear she had expected did not come. Instead, cold curiosity rose inside her. Let him come, she said. He needs to see exactly what he threw away. Not on a screen. In person. He'll be here by evening, Paul warned. Security has been increased, but he has a speaker badge. He may try to make a scene. Good, Allison said, heading toward the exit where photographers and reporters had already gathered. Then I'll teach him one more lesson. What lesson? She did not turn around. The woman he thought was a temporary step has just ended his era. The evening reception at the Belvedere Hotel in Aspen was exactly the kind of event where crystal glasses cost more than other people's monthly salaries, and the air was thick with money, expensive perfume, and quiet agreements. Outside, the mountains stood in the night like silent guards, their peaks dusted with snow while cold wind touched the hotel's glass walls. Inside, by contrast, it was almost too warm with light, heat, and people. Allison moved with a calm, deliberate grace that she seemed not to have possessed 48 hours earlier. She wore a dress of deep midnight blue velvet, so dark it almost looked like the night itself. It sharpened her figure and contrasted fiercely with the colorless cardigans Arthur had once preferred to see on her. Paul Morrison walked beside her. His hand rested lightly near her back. Not to guide her. To be there. To remind her she was not alone, although the choice would always remain hers. They're all looking at you, he said softly, leaning closer. They're looking at the stock ticker, Allison corrected, nodding toward the thin screens mounted into the dark wood walls. Wolf-Link was falling. Hawthorne Technologies was rising almost vertically. In this case, Paul said with a faint smile, that is the same thing. The heavy oak doors at the entrance burst open. The string quartet faltered and fell silent. Arthur Wolf stood in the doorway. He looked like the shadow of the man who had sat in the law firm the day before and believed he held the whole world in his hands. His suit was wrinkled. His tie was gone. The top button of his shirt was undone. His hair, normally fixed in flawless order, was disheveled. Sweat glistened on his forehead though the mountain air outside was cold. In one trembling hand, he held his speaker badge and waved it at the stunned concierge. I'm on the list. Arthur shouted, his voice breaking. I'm a speaker. Ask anyone. The room froze. 300 heads turned. Security guards in dark tailored suits began moving toward him. Arthur shoved one of them, a gesture more desperate than strong. Get away from me. I need to talk to my wife. Allison. He saw her at the far end of the room. His eyes locked onto her face. In them, there was too much anger, confusion, and fear. Allison, he called again, stumbling past a waiter. The tray of crystal glasses slipped and shattered across the floor. The sharp crack made the room go even stiller. Paul stepped forward, placing himself between them like a shield. I'll handle this, he said softly to Allison, his voice low and dangerously calm. Allison placed her palm against his chest. No, she said gently. He came to me. She stepped out from behind Paul. She did not walk toward Arthur. She simply stood where she was. The crowd parted by itself, creating a wide corridor between the man losing his throne and the woman who would no longer stand in the shadows. Arthur stopped a few steps from her. He was breathing hard. He looked at her dress, her pinned-back hair, the cold shine of stones at her throat. Then he looked at Paul Morrison standing behind her, calm and certain. You, Arthur breathed, raising a shaking finger. You did all this. You took everything from me. I did nothing, Arthur, Allison said. She did not speak loudly, but in the silence, her voice reached every corner of the room. I only took back what was mine. Yours. Arthur laughed, high and uneven. You were a math tutor. A nobody. I built that company. I sold the vision. I shook the right hands. And who wrote the code, Arthur? Allison asked calmly. Who worked at night for 3 years while you made friends in private clubs? Who restored the servers on Christmas Eve while you slept? That doesn't matter, he snapped, stepping closer. The guards tensed, but Allison raised one hand to stop them. We were married. Everything we had was shared. You stole my intellectual property. I signed the documents you prepared, Arthur, Allison said. Her voice became precise as a blade. Section 42.3. All intellectual property created before the company's registration remains the property of its author. She tilted her head slightly. You wanted the Hamptons house and the yacht so badly that you never even read what you were giving up. You decided my code was an old piece of furniture you could throw to the curb. Arthur's face darkened red. He suddenly understood that the room did not pity him. These people did not see a victim. They saw an entrepreneur who had failed to read his own documents. A man blinded by arrogance. Allison, Arthur said, and his voice changed. The aggression slipped away, replaced by the old soft tone that had helped him pull her back into place for 10 years. He took one step forward and lifted his palms. Listen. We're tired. We're emotional. Let's go upstairs and talk quietly. Without strangers. We can fix this. We're a team, remember? You and me against the whole world. It was the same phrase he had used to convince her to leave her job. The same phrase that closed over a forgotten birthday. The same phrase he had spoken when another woman's perfume once clung to his collar. Allison looked at him, truly looked at him. And for the first time, she did not see the man she had once loved. She saw a stranger. A small, frightened stranger. There is no we, Arthur, Allison said. And there is no team. There is only you, standing among the wreckage of your own ego. Don't you walk away from me, he broke out. He lunged toward her, losing control. Paul Morrison reacted before anyone else even understood the movement. He intercepted Arthur and stopped him with cold, trained ease. Security immediately took control. Enough, Paul said in a voice that contained not a drop of doubt. Mr. Wolf is leaving the room. Make sure he does not return. The guards led Arthur toward the exit. He did not look at Paul. His eyes remained fixed on Allison. You are nothing without me, he shouted, his words echoing off the high ceiling. You won't manage. You'll still need me. The doors closed. Silence returned. Allison did not tremble. She turned to the room, took a clean glass of sparkling water from a passing waiter, and lifted it. I apologize for the interruption, she said calmly. Now, let us return to supply chain integration. The room answered with polite, restrained, and clearly impressed applause. Only inside Allison did her hands shake. An hour later, she left the reception. She needed air. She found a balcony overlooking the dark valley. The cold mountain wind touched her exposed skin, reminding her body that it was still alive. That cold brought her back to reality better than any words could have. The door opened behind her. She expected Paul Morrison. I persuaded a waiter with $5,000 to let me through. It was Arthur. He stood in the shadow by the balcony door. He had cleaned himself up a little, tucked in his shirt, smoothed his hair. But his eyes were empty. He looked as though all the air had been let out of him. Allison did not turn around. She kept looking at the mountains. You are violating the no-contact order Paul's lawyers just filed. I don't care, Arthur said. Now his voice sounded tired. The old metal was gone. He came to the railing and stopped several steps away from her. He did not look at her. He stared into the dark. Page left. That was fast, Allison said without emotion. She saw the stock ticker. Said she didn't sign up for a husband who had lost his shine. Arthur gave a dry, humorless smile. You were right about everything. I know. He turned to her. Allison, please. I'm not talking about myself now. The company. 600 employees. Families. If the shares collapse to nothing, people lose stability. Pensions, payments, insurance, everything is tied to the valuation. He was using emotion again. It had always been his favorite tool. He knew Allison's weak point had been empathy. I know about the employees, Arthur, Allison said, finally turning to him. That is why Hawthorne Technologies sent job offers this morning to your engineers and support staff. 20% above their current salaries. Most of them have already accepted. Arthur's mouth opened, but no sound came. He gripped the railing as if his legs could no longer hold him. You really thought of everything, he whispered. I had 10 years to think, Arthur. While you stood on stages and called yourself a visionary, I sat at home and considered every variable. Every scenario. Every exit. He looked at her, and wet confusion appeared in his eyes. Why? Why did you destroy my life this way? Was I truly such a terrible husband? I gave you a house in the Hamptons. I gave you the life people dream about. You gave me a cage, Allison said. Her voice broke for the first time. You took my work and put your name on it. Then you convinced me I was not good enough to own what I had created. You made me invisible, Arthur. And the worst part is that I let you, because I thought love meant self-erasure. She stepped closer. Her eyes hardened like cold stone. But love is not erasing yourself for another person. That is not love. You appropriated my life. I simply took it back. Arthur reached into the inner pocket of his jacket. For a second, Allison tensed, but he pulled out only a folded sheet of paper. It was the divorce agreement. I can tear it up, he said desperately. We can undo everything. Say it was a mistake. You come back as co-chief executive. 50-50. Real partners. Allison, please. I can't do this without you. I don't understand how the code works. I don't know how to operate the internal system. I built an image on someone else's work. There it was. The truth. Finally naked, ugly, and bare. The truth he had hidden from the world. Allison looked at the paper. Then at Arthur. She saw fear in him. The terrible realization of his own ordinariness. No, Arthur, she said softly. I do not want to be your partner. And I do not want to be your wife. Then what do you want? He nearly shouted. What do you want from me? Nothing, Allison said. I want absolutely nothing from you. Not money. Not the company. Not an apology. She walked past him toward the door. I only want you to remember, she said, stopping at the threshold. Every time you see a Hawthorne Technologies truck. Every time you read about Ether in the news. Every time you look in the mirror. Remember that you had everything, and you traded it for a pretty trophy that did not love you and a title you did not deserve. She opened the door. Goodbye, Arthur. And she left him alone on the cold balcony. 6 months later, the new headquarters of Hawthorne Technologies was not in a glass skyscraper. It was a converted industrial warehouse in a creative district of Brooklyn, near old brick buildings, galleries, and workshops. The space was open, filled with natural light, greenery, and the steady hum of collaborative work. There were no corner offices. Allison sat at an ordinary desk in the center of the floor among her team. Many of these people had once worked at Wolflink, and now they looked calmer, more alive, happier than they had in years. On the enormous wall screen, the global metrics of Ether were displayed. The system had become the operational backbone for 60% of global shipping. In half a year, its efficiency gains had helped reduce carbon emissions by 4%. Not in a presentation. Not on paper. In the real world. Allison led the final team call and closed her laptop. 6 o'clock. Everyone go home. She walked out to the parking lot. The rain had ended, leaving the air clean, cool, and transparent. A perfectly restored black vintage Cadillac pulled up to the curb. Not a limousine. Not a display of power. Just a beautiful car with character. Paul Morrison lowered the window. He was not wearing a suit, only a cashmere sweater and jeans. He looked younger, calmer, more real. "Ready?" he asked. "Ready," Allison said, smiling as she sat in the passenger seat. "How did the board meeting go?" "Boring," she laughed. "They want to buy Wolflink." Paul raised an eyebrow. "And what did the chief executive say?" "I said no," Allison answered, fastening her seat belt. "Why buy a sinking ship when the crew is already with us?" Wolflink had filed for bankruptcy 2 weeks earlier. Arthur Wolf had been removed by his own board of directors. The last Allison had heard, he was living in a rented apartment outside the city and trying to launch a crypto startup nobody wanted to invest in. "Reasonable decision," Paul said as he drove out of the parking lot. "By the way, the house you look at, the little one with the garden in the Hudson Valley." Allison turned to him. "Yes. The seller accepted your offer." A warm wave spread through her chest. It was not a mansion. Not a palace. Not a house bought as part of someone else's image. It was a cozy, slightly imperfect old home with a wild garden, a wooden porch, and a view of the pines. Her home. Bought with her money. In her name. "Paul Morrison," she said. "Yes. Thank you for the ride." He looked at her and smiled. This time, he took her hand and did not let go. She did not let go either. "Always, partner," he said. They drove toward the city, merging into the evening stream of cars. No motorcade. No fanfare. No need to prove anything to anyone. Just two people building a life. Allison looked into the side mirror. In the reflection, she saw a woman she finally recognized. She was no longer Allison Wolf, the wife they had considered a temporary step. She was not only Allison Hawthorne, Chief Executive Officer. She was free. A montage of the key moments of this story, the signature on the documents, the black Cadillac in the rain, the stage in Aspen, and finally Allison smiling in her new office. Allison did not simply win a divorce. She took back her life. She proved that true strength does not always belong to the person who speaks the loudest. Sometimes it belongs to the person holding the key. Arthur Wolf learned through experience that when you underestimate the woman who helped build your throne, you should not be surprised when that throne one day stops holding you up. This story reminds us that your value is not defined by the person you were married to. It is defined by what you are capable of doing. What do you think about the way Allison reclaimed her justice? Was it too harsh, or did Arthur receive exactly the lesson he deserved? Write your thoughts in the comments. I read every single one. If you enjoyed this story about betrayal, strength, and a new beginning, leave a like. It helps the channel grow a lot. And do not forget to subscribe and turn on the bell so you do not miss the next story. Until next time, keep your head high and your standards even higher.